You vote to endorse the humiliation of courageous women such as Anita Hill, who confronted their abusers. You vote for the architects of the endless wars in the Middle East. You vote for the apartheid state of Israel. You vote for the wholesale surveillance of the public by government intelligence agencies and the abolition of due process and habeas corpus. You vote for austerity programs, including the destruction of welfare and cuts to Social Security. You vote for NAFTA, free trade deals, deindustrialization, a real decline in wages, the loss of hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs, and the offshoring of those jobs to underpaid workers who toil in sweatshops in countries such as Mexico, China, or Vietnam. You vote for the assault on teachers and public education and the transfer of federal funds to for-profit and Christian charter schools. You vote for the doubling of our prison population, the tripling and quadrupling of sentences, and the huge expansion of crimes meriting the death penalty. You vote for militarized police who gun down poor people, often of color, with impunity. You vote against the Green New Deal and immigration reform. You vote for the fracking industry. You vote for limiting a woman's right to abortion and reproductive rights. You vote for a segregated public school system in which the wealthy receive educational opportunities and poor people of color are denied a chance. You vote for punitive levels of student debt and the inability to free yourself of those debt obligations even if you file for bankruptcy. You vote for deregulating the banking industry and the abolition of Glass-Steagall. You vote for the for-profit insurance and pharmaceutical corporations and against universal health care. You vote for defense budgets that consume more than half of all discretionary spending. You vote for the use of unlimited oligarchic and corporate money to buy our elections. You vote for a politician who, during his time in the Senate, abjectly served the interests of MBNA, one of the largest independent credit card companies in the world, headquartered in Delaware, which also employed Biden's son, Hunter. Biden was one of the principal architects of the wars in the Middle East, where we have squandered upwards of $7 trillion and destroyed or extinguished the lives of millions of people. He is responsible for far more suffering and death at home and abroad than Trump. And if we had a functioning judicial and legislative system, Biden, along with the other architects of our disastrous imperial wars, corporate plundering of the country, and betrayal of the American working class, would be put on trial, not offered up as a solution to our political and economic debacle. The Democrats and their liberal apologists adopt tolerant positions on issues regarding race, religion, immigration, women's rights, and sexual identity, and pretend this is politics. But these issues are societal or ethical issues. They are important, but they are not social or political issues. The seizure of control of the economy by a class of global speculators and corporations has ruined the lives of the very groups the Democrats pretend to lift up. When Bill Clinton and the Democratic Party, for example, destroyed the old welfare system, 70% of the recipients were children. Those on the right of the political spectrum, and we must never forget that the positions of the Democratic Party would make it a far-right party in Europe, demonize those on the margins of society as scapegoats. The culture wars mask the reality Both parties are full partners in the destruction of our democratic institutions. Both parties have reconfigured American society into a mafia state. It only depends on how you want it dressed up. The power of politicians such as Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Mitch McConnell comes from being able to funnel corporate money to anointed candidates. In a functioning political system, one not saturated with corporate cash, they would not hold power. They have transformed what the Roman philosopher Cicero called a commonwealth, a res publica, a public thing, or the property of a people, into an instrument of pillage and repression on behalf of a global corporate oligarchy. We are serfs ruled by the obscenely rich, omnipotent masters who loot the U.S. Treasury, pay little or no taxes, and have perverted the judiciary, the media, and the legislative branches of government to strip us of civil liberties and give them the freedom to engage in financial fraud and theft. In the midst of the pandemic, what did our ruling kleptocrats do? They looted $4 trillion on a scale unseen since the 2008 bailout overseen by Barack Obama and Biden. They gorged and enriched themselves at our expense while tossing crumbs out the window.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you're doing great from wherever you're watching me from. I'm your host and presenter Judicial Stories. Honestly, I don't know how many times will we heal from this? How many times will America heal from this? Because every time people think about the decisions that they made, we still see a big problem with the United States. And in today's video, this is so much revealing. You're going to see Chris Hedges talking about this issue. People voted for fascism. People voted for their own mental health. People voted to give detriment to their mental health. And now the problems that we're having today as a result of hate, as a result of racism, because we chose to vote for fascism, and this is what people get for making the wrong decision. So many scholars, so many authors, so many black activists, so many white scholars who really know Trump for who he is, have warned Americans for the biggest time, please do not vote for Mr. Donald Trump. But they went ahead and voted for Mr. Donald Trump, especially white America. We have 76% of white people that voted Mr. Donald Trump. And today, everything that you see is happening is as a result of poor decision making, right? Because somebody lied to you about they are going to make your culture look more superior. They are going to support white supremacy. But at what cost? At the expense of your economy, at the expense that you can't pay your school fees, at the expense that you can't pay your rent, at the expense you don't know what you'll eat tomorrow. And it's crazy because what Mr. Donald Trump is doing is keeping the top 1% and making sure that the bottom 99% remains where it is today. And all that is as a result of you people that decided to vote for Mr. Donald Trump. And so I want us to watch this video. Chris Hedges is breaking down to you that the decisions that you made were wrong, and you need to learn from that, because these mistakes that you made are costing you big time, and it's important for the United States to learn. And honestly, I don't know, it will take time for the people of the United States to heal from this, because the devastation that Mr. Donald Trump has caused to the American economy, it's really, really crazy. Just recently, I'm seeing India and China merging. They have something that they are putting in place. And this is always a fight against the tariffs that Mr. Donald Trump has imposed to these people. And this is also affecting the citizens of the United States, because they also need these products that come from overseas. And so it's going to be crazy. But again, didn't all these people warn you? They warned you. Buckle up for this video. I'm your host and presenter, Judicial Stories. For those who are watching me for the first time, I'm just asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join my membership, and really get to see what I can offer you. For those who wish to buy me a coffee, you can buy me a coffee through my Cash App account. I'll be really grateful. And for those who are supporting me through Cash App, through liking, sharing my videos, man, I'm really, really grateful. So let's watch the video. I'll be back and then I'll be sharing my thoughts at the end of it all. So let's go.
Windows of their private jets, yachts, penthouses, and palatial estates to the suffering and despised masses. The CARES Act handed trillions in funds or tax breaks to oil companies, the airline industry, which alone got $50 billion in stimulus money, the cruise ship industry, and gave a $170 billion windfall to the real estate industry. It handed subsidies to private equity firms, lobbying groups, whose political action committees have given some $200 million in campaign contributions to politicians in the last 2 decades, the meat industry, and corporations that have moved offshore to avoid paying U.S. taxes. The CARES Act allowed the largest corporations to gobble up money that was supposed to keep small businesses solvent to pay workers. It gave 80% of tax breaks under the stimulus package to millionaires and allowed the wealthiest to get stimulus checks that averaged $1.7 million. The CARES Act also authorized $454 billion for the Treasury Department's Exchange Stabilization Fund, a massive slush fund doled out by Trump cronies to corporations that, when leveraged 10-to-1, can be used to create a staggering $4.5 trillion in assets. The act authorized the Fed to give $1.5 trillion in loans to Wall Street, which no one expects will ever be repaid. American billionaires have gotten $434 billion richer since the pandemic. Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, whose corporation, Amazon, paid no federal taxes last year alone, added nearly $72 billion to his personal wealth since the pandemic started. And during this same period, 55 million Americans lost their jobs. Now, the molding of the public into warring factions works commercially. It works politically. It destroys, as it is designed to do, class solidarity. But it's also a recipe for social disintegration. It propels us towards the kind of Hobbesian world Primo Levi and Sigmund Freud warned us about. I watched competing ethnic groups in the former Yugoslavia retreat into antagonistic tribes. They seized rival mass media outlets and used them to spew lies, mythological narratives exalting themselves and their ethnic group, along with vitriol and hate against the ethnicities they demonized. This poisoned solidarity, which we are replicating, pumped out month after month in Yugoslavia, destroyed the capacity for empathy, perhaps the best definition of evil, and led to a savage fratricide. The United States, awash in military-grade weaponry, is already plagued by an epidemic of mass shootings. There are death threats against critics of Trump, including Representative Ilhan Omar. There was an aborted plot by 13 members of a right-wing militia group to kidnap the governors of Michigan and Virginia and start a civil war. A Trump supporter mailed pipe bombs to prominent Democrats and CNN, an effort to decapitate the hierarchy of the Democratic Party. as well as terrorize the media outlet that is the party's principal propaganda platform. The spark that usually sets such tinder ablaze is martyrdom. Aaron J. Danielson, a supporter of the right-wing group Patriot Prayer, was wearing a loaded Glock pistol in a holster and had bear spray and an expandable metal baton when he was shot dead on August 29th, allegedly, by Michael Forrest Reinhold, a supporter of Antifa, in the streets of Portland. A woman in the crowd can be heard shouting after the shooting, "I am not sad that an effing fascist died tonight." Reinhold was ambushed and killed by federal agents in Washington state in what appears to be an act of extrajudicial murder, not that different from the state executions I covered in Argentina or El Salvador. Once people start being sacrificed for the cause, it takes little for demagogues to insist that self-preservation necessitates violence. Political stagnation and corruption, along with economic and social misery, spawn crisis cults, movements led by demagogues that prey on the unbearable psychological and financial distress and champion violence as a form of moral purification. These crisis cults, already well established among followers of the Christian right, right-wing militia groups, and many of those who back Donald Trump, who look at him not so much as a politician but as a cult leader, all peddle magical thinking and an infantilism that promises, if you surrender all autonomy, prosperity, restored national glory, a return to a mythical past, order, and security. For this reason, Trump is the symptom. He is not the disease. And if he leaves office, far more competent and dangerous demagogues will rise if the social conditions are not radically improved to take his place. I fear we are headed towards a Christianized fascism. The greatest moral failing of the liberal church, which I come out of, was its refusal, justified in the name of tolerance and dialogue, to denounce the followers of the Christian right as heretics. By tolerating the intolerant, it ceded religious legitimacy to an array of con artists, charlatans, and demagogues, along with their cultish supporters. It stood by as the core gospel message, concern for the poor and the oppressed, was perverted into a magical world where God and Jesus showered believers with material wealth and power. The white race became God's chosen agent. Imperialism and war became divine instruments for purging the world of infidels and barbarians, evil itself. Capitalism, because God blessed the righteous with wealth and power and condemned the immoral to poverty and suffering, became shorn of its inherent cruelty and exploitation. The iconography and symbols of American nationalism became intertwined with the iconography and symbols of the Christian faith. The mega-pastors, narcissists, who ruled despotic, cult-like fiefdoms, make millions of dollars by using this heretical belief system to prey on the despair and desperation of their congregations, victims of neoliberalism and deindustrialization. These believers find in Trump, who preyed on this despair in his casinos and through his sham university, and these mega-pastors, champions of the unfettered greed, cult of masculinity, lust for violence, white supremacy, bigotry, American chauvinism, religious intolerance, anger, racism, and conspiracy theories that are at the core of the Christian right. When I wrote my book, American fascists, the Christian right, and the war on America, I was quite serious about the term fascists. Tens of millions of Americans live hermetically sealed inside the vast media and educational edifice erected by the Christian right. In this world, miracles are real. Satan, allied with liberal, secular humanists and the deep state, along with Muslims, immigrants, feminists, intellectuals, artists, and a host of other internal enemies, is seeking to destroy America. Trump is God's anointed vessel to build the Christian nation and cement into place a government that instills biblical values. These biblical values include banning abortion, protecting the traditional family, turning the Ten Commandments into secular law, crushing infidels, especially Muslims, indoctrinating children in schools with biblical teachings, and thwarting sexual license, which includes any sexual relationship other than marriage between a man and a woman. Trump is routinely compared by evangelical leaders to the biblical King Cyrus, who rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem and restored the Jews to the city. Trump has in fact filled his ideological void with Christian fascism. He has elevated members of the Christian right to prominent positions, including Mike Pence to the vice presidency, Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State, and Betsy DeVos as Secretary of Education. Ben Carson as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, William Barr as Attorney General, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, and the televangelist Paula White to his Faith and Opportunities Initiative. More importantly, Trump has handed the Christian right veto and appointment power over key positions in government, especially in the federal courts. He has installed 133 district court judges out of 677 total, 50 appeals court judges out of 179 total, and 2 U.S. Supreme Court justices, and with Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, most likely 3 out of 9. This is 19% of the federal trial judges currently in service. Nearly all of the extremists, including Barrett, who make up the judicial appointees, have been rated as unqualified by the American Bar Association, the country's largest nonpartisan coalition of lawyers. Trump has adopted the Islamophobia of the Christian fascists. He has banned Muslim immigrants and rolled back civil rights legislation. He has made war on reproductive rights by restricting abortion and defunding Planned Parenthood. He has stripped away LGBTQ rights. He has ripped down the firewall between church and state by revoking the Johnson Amendment, which prohibits churches, which are tax exempt, from endorsing political candidates. His appointees, including Pence, Pompeo, and DeVos, throughout the government, routinely use biblical strictures to justify an array of policy decisions, including environmental deregulation, war, tax cuts, and the replacement of public schools with charter schools, an action that permits the transfer of federal election education funds to Christian schools. At the same time, the Christian right is building paramilitary organizations not only through ad hoc militias, but through mercenary groups of private contractors controlled by figures such as Eric Prince, the brother of Betsy DeVos and the former CEO of Blackwater. I studied ethics at Harvard Divinity School with James Luther Adams, who had been in Germany in 1935 and 1936. Adams witnessed the rise of the so-called German Christian church, which was pro-Nazi. He warned us about the disturbing parallels between the German Christian church and the Christian right. Adolf Hitler was, in the eyes of the German Christian church, a Volk Messiah, an instrument of God, a view similar to the one held today about Trump by many of his white evangelical supporters. Those demonized for Germany's economic collapse especially Jews and communists, were agents of Satan. Fascism, Adams told us, always cloaked itself in a nation's most cherished symbols and rhetoric. And fascism would come to America, he said, not in the guise of stiff-armed, marching brown shirts and Nazi swastikas, but in mass recitations of the Pledge of Allegiance, the biblical sanctification of the state, and the sacralization of American militarism. Adams was the first person I heard label the extremists of the Christian right as fascists. And Adams warned us that liberals, as in Nazi Germany, were blind to the tragic dimension of history and radical evil, and they would not react until it was too late. Trump's legacy will, I fear, be the empowerment of the Christian fascists. They are what comes next. Noam Chomsky, for this reason, is right when he warns that Pence is far more dangerous than Trump. For decades, the Christian fascists have been organizing to take power. They have built infrastructures and organizations, including lobbying groups, schools, colleges, and law schools, as well as media platforms to prepare. They have seeded their cadre into positions of power. We on the left, meanwhile, have seen our institutions and organizations destroyed or corrupted by corporate power and been seduced by the boutique activism of identity politics. FRC Action, the legislative affiliate of the Family Research Council, already gives 245 members of Congress a 100% approval rating for supporting legislation that is backed by the Christian right. Christian fascism is an emotional life raft for tens of millions of Americans. It is impervious to science and verifiable fact. The Christian fascists by choice have severed themselves from rational thought and the secular society that almost destroyed them and their families and thrust them into deep despair. We will not placate or disarm this movement, bent on our destruction. By attempting to claim that we too have Christian values, this appeal only strengthens the legitimacy of Christian heretics and weakens our own. These dispossessed people will either be reintegrated into the economy and the society, and their shattered social bonds mended, or the movement will grow more virulent and more powerful. The Christian right is determined to keep the public focus on societal or ethical as opposed to economic issues. The corporate media, whether it supports or opposes the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, almost exclusively discusses her opposition to abortion and membership in People of Praise, a far-right Catholic sect that practices speaking in tongues. What our corporate masters, along with the Christian fascists, do not want examined is Barrett's subservience to corporate power, her hostility to workers, civil liberties, unions, and environmental regulations. And since the Democratic Party is beholden to the same donor class as the Republican Party, and since the media long ago substituted the culture wars for politics, the most ominous threat posed by Barrett and the Christian right is ignored. The road to despotism is always paved with righteousness. All fascist movements paper over their squalid belief systems with the veneer of morality. They mouth pieties about restoring law and order, right and wrong, the sanctity of life, civic and family virtues, patriotism and tradition to mask their dismantling of the open society and silencing and persecution of those who dissent. The Christian right, awash in money from corporations that understand their true political intent, will use any tool, no matter how devious, from right-wing armed militias to the invalidation of ballots, to block Biden and Democratic candidates from assuming office. Capitalism driven by the obsession to maximize profit and reduce the cost of labor by slashing workers' rights and wages is antithetical to the Christian gospel, as well as the Enlightenment ethic of Immanuel Kant. But capitalism in the hands of the Christian fascists has become sacralized in the form of the prosperity gospel, the belief that Jesus came to minister to our material needs, blessing believers with wealth and power. The prosperity gospel is an ideological cover for the slow-motion corporate coup d'etat. And this is why large corporations such as Tyson Foods, which places Christian right chaplains in its plants, Purdue, Walmart, and Sam's Warehouse, along with many other corporations, pour money into the movement and its institutions, such as Liberty University and Patrick Henry Law School. This is why corporations have given millions to groups such as the Judicial Crisis Network and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to campaign for Barrett's appointment to the court. Barrett has ruled to cheat gig workers out of overtime, greenlight fossil fuel extraction and pollution, gut Obamacare, and strip consumers of protection from corporate funds. Barrett, as a circuit court judge, heard at least 55 cases in which citizens challenged corporate abuse and fraud, and she ruled in favor of corporations 76% of the time. Our corporate masters do not care about abortion, gun rights, or the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. But like the German industrialists who backed the Nazi Party, they know that the Christian right will give an ideological veneer to ruthless corporate tyranny. These oligarchs view the Christian fascists the same way the German industrialists viewed the Nazis, as buffoons. They are aware that the Christian fascists will trash what is left of our anemic democracy and the ecosystem. But they also know they will make huge profits in the process, and the rights of workers and citizens will be ruthlessly suppressed. If you are poor, if you lack proper medical care, if you are paid substandard wages, if you are trapped in poverty, if you are a victim of police violence, this is because, according to the prosperity gospel, you are not a good Christian. In this belief system, you deserve what you get. There is nothing wrong, these homegrown fascists preach, with the structures or systems of power. Like all totalitarian movements, followers are seduced into calling for their own enslavement. As the Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels understood, the best propaganda is that which, as it were, works invisibly, penetrates the whole of life, without the public having any knowledge of the propagandistic initiative. The tinder that could ignite violent conflagrations lies ominously stacked around us. It may be set off by Trump's defeat in the election. Millions of disenfranchised white Americans who see no way out of their economic and social misery, struggling with an emotional void, are seething with rage against a corrupt ruling elite and bankrupt liberal class that betrayed them. They're tired of the political stagnation, grotesque, mounting social inequality, and the punishing fallout from the pandemic. Millions more alienated young men and women, also locked out of the economy, and with no realistic prospect for advancement or integration, gripped by the same emotional void, have harnessed their fury in the name of tearing down the governing structures and anti-fascism. These polarized extremes are inching closer and closer to violence. We have three options. Reform, which given the decay in the American body politic is impossible, revolution, or tyranny. If the corporate state is not overthrown, then America will soon become a naked police state where any opposition, however tepid, will be silenced with draconian censorship or force. Police in cities around the country have already thwarted the reporting by dozens of journalists covering the protests through physical force, arrests, tear gas, rubber bullets, and pepper spray. This will become normalized. The huge social divides, often built around race, will be used by the Christian fascists to set neighbor against neighbor. Armed Christian patriots will attack those groups blamed for social collapse, dissent, even nonviolent dissent, will become treason. Peter Drucker observed that Nazism succeeded not because people believed in its fantastic promises, but in spite of them. Nazi absurdities, he pointed out, had been witnessed by a hostile press, a hostile radio, a hostile cinema, a hostile church, and a hostile government which entirely pointed out the Nazi lies, the Nazi inconsistency, the unattainability of their promises, and the dangers and folly of their course. Nobody, he noted, would have been a Nazi if rational belief in the Nazi promises had been a prerequisite. The poet, playwright, and socialist revolutionary Ernst Toller, who was forced into exile and stripped of his citizenship when the Nazis took power in 1933, wrote in his autobiography, "The people are tired of reason, tired of thought and reflection. They ask, what has reason done in the last few years? What good have insights and knowledge done us?" After Toller committed suicide in 1939, W.H. Auden, in his poem in memory of Ernst Toller, wrote, "We are lived by powers we pretend to understand. They arrange our loves. It is they who direct at the end the enemy bullet, the sickness, or even our hand. Once the internal enemies are purged from the nation, we are promised America will recover its lost glory, except that once one enemy is obliterated, another takes its place. Crisis cults require a steady escalation of conflict and a steady stream of victims. Every new crisis becomes more urgent and more extreme than the last. This is what made the war in the former Yugoslavia inevitable. Once one stage of conflict reaches a crescendo, it loses its efficacy. It must be replaced by ever more brutal and deadly confrontations. It is what Ernst Jünger called a feast of death. These crisis cults, as Drucker understood, are irrational and schizophrenic. They have no coherent ideology. They turn morality upside down. They appeal exclusively to emotions. Burlesque and spectacle become politics. Depravity becomes morality. Atrocities and murder, as the federal marshals who wantonly gunned down the Antifa activists Michael Reinhold in Washington State Illustrated, becomes heroism. Crime and fraud become justice. Greed and nepotism become civic virtues. What these crisis cults stand for today, they condemn tomorrow. There is only emotional consistency. At the height of the reign of terror on March 6, 1794, during the French Revolution, Maximilien Robespierre announced that the Committee for Public Safety now recognized the existence of God. The French revolutionaries, fanatical atheists who had desecrated churches and confiscated church property, murdered hundreds of priests, and forced another 30,000 into exile, instantly reversed themselves to send to the guillotine those who disparaged religion. In the end, exhausted by the moral confusion and internal contradictions, these crisis cults yearn only for self-annihilation. Our ruling elites will not restore these ruptured social bonds. They will not address the deep despair that grips America. They will not respond to the climate emergency. As the country unravels, they will reach for the familiar tools of state repression. and the ideological prop provided by Christian fascism. It is up to us to carry out sustained acts of nonviolent mass resistance. If we mobilize in large and small ways to fight for an open society, to create communities that, as Václav Havel wrote, live in truth, we hold out the possibility of pushing back against these crisis cults. We hold out the possibility of holding it back.
The pain and suffering, the American sadism that I'm seeing right now going on, all these things, only if you decided to make the right decision, you couldn't have been where you are today. And this always is as a result of not making the right decision. Only if you could have made the right decision, the United States couldn't have been where it is today. That hope, that faith, that sovereignty, that powerfulness that people used to see the United States to be, it is not. Why so? Because of the problems that it is going through. And in fact, American citizens themselves are getting to learn that they are being exploited in their own country. I've seen people complain that even if you're earning 75,000 USD in a year, that means nothing. That means that it can't sustain you. It can't sustain you because of the decisions that you made. How many farmers are crying? How many constructors are crying? How many CEOs have fired people because it's unsustainable? All because you came up with a model that you cannot sustain. And that's the problem. You're having a sick president. You're having a president that can't make the right decision for its own citizens. And when you trust this person, they say that Mr. Donald Trump is a one-man circus. He's playing with his own oligarchs. The only person that is serving his own oligarchs. He doesn't care about you. It has always been about him. So as a result, what does that do to you? That's what happens. And so I hope that white America, you make the right decision. If you're a white person and you know you voted for Mr. Donald Trump, because it also affects me, even back in Africa. Somewhere, somehow, it affects me, right? And so we need to call you out for the mistakes that you made. We need to let you know that this is what you pay for your racism. This is what you pay for your fascism. And most of the times, it doesn't end well. When you decide to be a racist, when you decide to vote for fascism, your children are going to be deported. Just type something on the social media, something just negative, trying to talk about Mr. Donald Trump. You are going to be deported, right? And this has been a quagmire to school-going students who are trying to, use their prize knowledge to talk about all these social issues, talk about all these social factors. To criticize Mr. Donald Trump today is like a problem. That is because of the over-policing in the social media that is happening today. I don't know. This is just a question. What will you do if you had a chance of making the right decision back there in the ballot box? You still have years and years of suffering. I'm not seeing it getting any better. I'm not seeing anything changing. Maybe a benefit of doubt. Maybe Mr. Donald Trump is planning something. Oh, I don't know. He's becoming sick. He might die anytime soon. Or maybe not. Allegedly. I don't know. But I pray that the next time you have a choice of making decision, you make the right decision. Because all these things that you do, they go ahead and they mess you up. And once they mess you up, you have nowhere to go. You have no one to turn to. And how you want help? You are warned that this is going to happen. And right now it's happening. What are you going to do about it? That's just a question. So please let me know what you think about this in the comment section. As you know, I'm your host and presenter Judicial Stories. But until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.